This is A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's take a look at today's top stories. A 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon has come into effect, Donald Trump describing it as a historic day. Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are holding virtual talks on the Strait of Hormuz in Paris. And today in Turkey, Antalya Diplomacy Forum is starting with global leaders from around the world. Iran has declared that the Strait of Hormuz is completely open to commercial shipping, with oil prices falling sharply after the announcement. The statement was made by Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, saying the Strait of Hormuz is completely open for commercial shipping during the ceasefire period. Meanwhile, Iranian military officials said that military vessels will not be allowed to pass through the strait. U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed the opening, but said the naval blockade against Iran will remain in force. The 10-day ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon is being seen as a significant diplomatic step towards easing tensions in the Middle East. According to U.S. President Donald Trump, the deal was reached through negotiations between the parties and will take effect on Thursday. However, positions remain deeply divided along the Israel-Hezbollah line, leaving the durability of the truce uncertain.
A 10-day ceasefire agreement has been reached between Israel and Lebanon. US President Donald Trump said the truce will take effect on Thursday, marking a temporary pause in the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah.
I think they will. I think it's going to be, actually it's very exciting because it's 48 years. We're going to be meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, as you know, and the president of Lebanon. And I had a great talk with both of them today. They're going to be having a ceasefire, and that'll include Hezbollah. And I think it could be number 10 for me. I think we will have an agreement between Lebanon, and they're going to take care of Hezbollah. But they're going to be working on Hezbollah right now. But we'll have an agreement between Israel, very importantly, and Lebanon.
Will you support our debate?
However, significant differences remain between the parties. The Israeli army has said it does not plan to withdraw from southern Lebanon during the ceasefire. Hezbollah, in turn, stated that any deal must not allow Israeli forces freedom of movement inside Lebanese territory.
In these peace talks, we have two fundamental demands. First, the disarmament of Hezbollah. Second, a sustainable peace agreement, peace through strength. In order to achieve the ceasefire, Hezbollah insisted on two conditions. The first condition was that Israel must withdraw from all Lebanese territory up to the international border. The second condition was a ceasefire based on a quiet-for-quiet arrangement. I did not agree to either of these, and indeed neither of these conditions is being met. We are remaining in Lebanon in a reinforced security zone. This is not the 5 points that existed before Roaring Lion. It is a security zone that begins at the sea and extends to Mount Dov and the foothills of Mount Hermon up to the Syrian border. It is a security zone 10 kilometers deep, which is way stronger, way more powerful, way more continuous, and way more solid than what we had before.
The conflict escalated on March 2nd after Hezbollah launched attacks in support of Tehran. Since then, Israeli strikes have killed thousands in Lebanon and forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee their homes. Fighting continues, particularly in southern Lebanon, with heavy clashes reported in the strategic town of Bint Jbeil. Israel has said it aims to establish a security zone in the area. Despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, the situation remains highly fragile, and it is unclear whether the ceasefire will hold. Hezbollah said on Thursday that the presence of Israeli troops in Lebanon grants the group and the Lebanese people the right to resist, stressing that any ceasefire must not allow Israel freedom of movement within the country. Nabi Berri, Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament and an ally of Hezbollah, urged residents to delay returning to their towns and villages until the situation becomes clearer and the terms of the ceasefire are finalized.
While some families are returning to their homes, others remain displaced and say they are waiting for a lasting ceasefire before deciding to go back in southern Lebanon. Residents began making their way back following a 10-day ceasefire with Israel as convoys carrying belongings moved through heavily damaged roads and villages. In Nabatia and nearby areas, people crossed rubble-strewn streets and destroyed infrastructure, with some waving victory signs as they returned. Despite the ceasefire, much of the region remains heavily damaged and still undergoing clearance. Some residents say they are relieved to be back, while others remain cautious about returning.
We're here thanks to these heroic young men, and we stayed here, in our hometown with our livelihoods and all that. What could we do? Thank God the war ended thanks to these heroic young men, the fighters.
Let the war officially stop, that's it. At that point we will return. But now, no, I'm telling you, we won't return until the war stops and they withdraw from all Lebanese territory.
Iran has welcomed the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon with caution, calling it an integral part of the Iran-US negotiations deal. Our correspondent from Tehran brings more.
Iran has cautiously welcomed the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, stressing that it is an integral part of Tehran's set of conditions for an end to the conflict with Washington. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who headed Iran's negotiating team with the US in Islamabad last Saturday, said in a post on the social platform X that Iran will approach this ceasefire with caution and stands together until complete victory is achieved. Also, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai, in a statement, welcomed the ceasefire between Tel Aviv and Beirut. He said that the cessation of the war in Lebanon was part of the ceasefire understanding between Iran and the United States, mediated by Pakistan. Both Ghalibaf and Baghai expressed Iran's gratitude over Pakistan's mediation efforts to establish the ceasefire in Lebanon as part of the Iran-US negotiations framework. Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir visited Tehran on Wednesday and Thursday, holding high-level talks with President Masoud Pezeshkian, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He also held a rare meeting with the commander of Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Major General Ali Abdullahi. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from Tehran, Foreign News.
Some countries and organizations have welcomed the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, saying it could pave the way towards peace in the region. However, significant questions remain over whether the ceasefire will hold in practice.
World leaders have welcomed the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon brokered by US President Donald Trump. In a post on X, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement brings significant relief at a time when the conflict has already claimed many lives. She stressed that Europe will continue to call for full respect for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, while also increasing humanitarian assistance to the Lebanese people. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, also welcomed the ceasefire, saying it would allow for an immediate halt to hostilities and provide much-needed relief for civilians. Speaking during a visit to Morocco, she urged both sides to confirm the agreement, adding that it should pave the way for reduced violence and renewed negotiations towards a more sustainable peace. She also highlighted the importance of ensuring the safety of civilians on both sides of the Lebanon-Israel border, calling on Hezbollah to lay down its weapons and on Israel to respect Lebanon's sovereignty. French President Emmanuel Macron also voiced support for the ceasefire, while expressing concern over its fragility amid continued military operations. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also welcomed the agreement, saying it could pave the way towards lasting peace. He reaffirmed Pakistan's unwavering support for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity and pledged continued efforts for long-term stability in the region. The Japanese government also welcomed the US-brokered ceasefire, describing it as an important step towards peace in the Middle East. Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Masanao Ozaki said in Tokyo that Japan views the agreement as meaningful progress towards regional stability.
A possible breakthrough may be nearing in one of the longest-running disputes between Washington and Ankara. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey says the issue of sanctions linked to Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 defense system could be resolved soon. Speaking at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, Tom Barrack said relations between the two countries have never been better. He also signaled that progress on the S-400 issue could reopen the door to the F-35 program. The U.S. sanctioned Turkey in 2020 over the purchase and removed it from the fighter jet program, a move that became a major point of tension between the NATO allies.
Go ahead. There's a hand up over here. Yeah.
Europe could run short of jet fuel within about 6 weeks if global supply disruptions persist, the International Energy Agency has warned. IEA Executive Director said tensions in the Middle East, particularly risks to flows through the Strait of Hormuz, could trigger one of the most severe energy crises in history. He warned that prolonged disruption of oil and gas shipments could push up fuel, electricity and transport prices and may even lead to flight cancellations, with wider knock-on effects on global inflation and growth. World leaders are meeting in Paris today, trying to ease pressure on a crisis that's now hitting energy markets and global trade. The focus is clear: how to secure one of the world's most critical shipping lanes without pushing tensions even further. Leaders in Paris are working to address the growing disruption around the Strait of Hormuz as concerns mount over energy supplies and global trade. The talks are centered on restoring safe passage and coordinating an international response to stabilize a situation with far-reaching economic consequences. But beyond the immediate priority, there is a broader question: how to prevent these from escalating into a prolonged disruption with deeper consequences for the global economy. President of Syria's transitional government has used an appearance at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum to push for de-escalation in the region and the return to diplomacy. President Ahmed al-Shara has welcomed efforts to secure a ceasefire in Lebanon after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a truce between Lebanon and Israel. Speaking at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, Shara said he hoped the region could now move away from further escalation. He said Syria wants stability across the Middle East and warned that any deeper fallout involving Iran would affect the wider region.
We were pushing for this war not to break out in the first place, also because Iran is a country with a population of about 85 million people, and any harm that befalls Iran from within could affect the region in general. We are pushing for a stable region and for its problems to be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy.
A community initiative in Syria is giving families a place to honor relatives killed or still missing after years of violence. Through tree planting and personal memorials, the project is aimed at preserving the names and stories of those who never returned.
In a suburb of Damascus, families are planting trees to remember civilians killed or still missing after years of conflict in Syria. The project, called Fig Gardens, turns grief into a living memorial. Each tree is dedicated to a victim, with names and photographs placed beside newly planted saplings. Founder Ammar Jabir says the initiative honours civilians lost over decades and is meant to preserve their stories for future generations.
Each tree is planted in memory of a civilian victim. We are honouring lives lost from 1970 to December 8, 2024. This is the third garden under the initiative, and we want to take the project to more places across Syria.
The Daraya site is the third garden created under the project, which organisers hope to expand to other parts of Syria. The garden gives many families a place to express grief after years of unresolved loss. Participant Hannah Hadler says she lost 9 relatives, including her son, who disappeared in detention in 2013.
Nothing can replace the ones we lost. This tree was planted for my son and for all those who are gone. There is great sorrow inside us, and this is how we express our feelings.
For the families involved, the garden stands as both a memorial and a call not to forget those who never came home.
Myanmar's new president Min Aung Hlaing approved an amnesty for 4,335 prisoners, including former President Win Myint. The report also mentioned commutation of death sentences to life sentences to 40 years, and term reductions by 1/6 for other prisoners, without elaborating. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, more than 30,000 people were detained on political charges since the military, led by Min Aung Hlaing, staged a coup against an elected government in 2021. Nearly 900 Rohingya refugees were reported missing or dead in 2025 after attempting sea crossings in the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal, making it the deadliest year on record for the route. The report was made by the United Nations Refugee Agency. According to the agency, more than 1 in 7 of around 6,500 people who attempted the journey last year were either missing or confirmed dead. The crossings remain part of a wider crisis, with Rohingya continuing to risk overcrowded and unsafe boats in search of safety. Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Hormuz crisis diplomacy and global mediation efforts. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Our top story for discussion. A high-stakes diplomatic push is underway as Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer convene around 40 non-belligerent nations to address the deepening crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point that handles roughly 1/5 of global oil supply. This comes as the Antalya Diplomacy Forum gathers global leaders in Turkey, with mediation efforts intensifying amid the tensions between the United States, Israel and Iran. To unpack these developments, we're joined by Matthew Bryce, speaking to us from Athens, Greece. Mr. Bryce, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be with you as always.
Mr. Bryce, what is the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz, and how do you see the recent opening by Iran and the U.S. comment that it will, quote, remain closed until a deal is reached?
Well, yeah, President Trump is playing an interesting negotiating game. It's sort of like a psychological warfare, making it seem like he really doesn't care whether or not the strait opens, or that it's the responsibility of the countries that consume the oil and liquid natural gas and fertilizer products that transit it. But he clearly very much wants it to be open. So I think President Trump's statement is an attempt to look like, he is relaxed, and time is on his side, and he can keep negotiating with Iran with the strait closed until Iran gives in to U.S. demands. But I don't think time really is on President Trump's side. I think time is, at least in the Iranians' minds, on their side, because they don't have to face a congressional or a parliamentary election this November, and they can they don't mind if their population and economy suffers deprivation.
Mr. Bryce, what leverage do non-belligerent countries actually have in influencing this crisis, and how effective can diplomatic initiatives led by France and the UK realistically be?
Yeah, those are two key questions. Obviously, nobody knows the answers to them. So far, the non-belligerent countries have had no leverage whatsoever. I mean, Pakistan, with support from Turkey and from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, has played a very important role as a mediator, but that's not leverage. That's simply facilitating communications. But the question over time is, will the damage caused to the global economy, as well as to the infrastructure of the Gulf states, lead to political pressure on the United States that compels or persuades President Trump to try to end the war? But to tell you the truth, I think already he really does want to end the war. And the Iranians are the ones who've been continuing the conflict because they know, or they believe, time is on their side.
So what role is Turkey trying to play at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum? Do you see Turkey as a credible mediator between Washington, Tehran and Tel Aviv?
I do. I very much do. Turkey has proven its effectiveness and skill as a mediator over time, going back to July of 2022, when, together with the United Nations, Turkey brokered the agreement between Ukraine and Russia to allow grain shipments to proceed through the Black Sea. Turkey also played an important role last autumn, as President Trump himself acknowledged, in negotiating or helping to negotiate the release of hostages or captives, Israeli captives by Hamas, that then cleared the way for the ceasefire agreement that President Trump brokered to take effect. And now we know that over the course of this entire war of the United States and Israel against Iran, that Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has been extremely active on the telephone and physically in terms of personal diplomacy, in helping smooth or advance the communication between Iran on one side and the U.S. on the other side. And interestingly, not trying to take the credit, but simply supporting Pakistan in the lead. And that's a new form of diplomacy for Turkey, where it's supporting, it doesn't claim credit, but it actually helps.
Mr. Bryson, in your view, are we witnessing a shift toward a more multipolar diplomatic response to global crises?
You can't tell based on this one instance whether it marks a broader global shift, but what is clear is that so-called middle powers like Turkey, like Pakistan, like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, are playing the key mediation role here. Now, will that, along with the eroding of the United States prestige and trustworthiness on the part of its allies, as you said, we see that Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer are hosting a discussion that does not involve the United States on opening the Strait of Hormuz. So if the United States credibility and trustworthiness continues to erode, then yes, then we will be seeing a shift in which middle powers like the ones I mentioned play key mediating roles to end conflicts.
Mr. Bryson, what do you think? How might this situation impact NATO unity given differing positions among member states?
It's already impacted NATO unity in a very negative way, as we just said, that two crucial NATO allies of the United States, France and the United Kingdom, are hosting another meeting, second one of many countries, to figure out how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, in which the United States is not participating. Moreover, the fact that the United States launched this war without consulting with any of its NATO allies, and not even with the U.S. Congress, also, I think, is undermining the trustworthiness of the United States in the eyes of its NATO allies. And on top of that, President Trump is openly saying that maybe he's going to withdraw the United States from NATO overall. Now, he can't do that. He doesn't have the power to do that legally, but he may do it in practice.
Mr. Bryson, there is some breaking news out of the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Israel will not be bombing Lebanon any longer. They're prohibited from doing so by the USA." What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's too early to tell, because it seems that throughout this whole war, first of all, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu that persuaded President Trump to go to war together with Israel against Iran. And then at several key junctures, when it seemed like maybe there was some progress toward a diplomatic breakthrough to end the war, Israel took escalatory steps that prevented that agreement from happening. So I would expect Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue that sort of behavior. I think he realizes that as long as the war continues, it's much more difficult for him to be taken back into court and prosecuted and perhaps convicted of corruption and then maybe sent to prison. So I think Israel really wants the war to continue. And what nobody knows, except maybe President Trump, is when President Trump reaches his limit and really does prohibit Israel from attacking Lebanon. And that means cutting off munition supplies from the United States to Israel.
Matthew Bryce, thank you very much for talking to A News. We truly appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks a lot.
I thank you.
Thank you. After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we continue with our regional stories. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum is underway in Turkey, with senior leaders from across the region already taking part in opening discussions on global challenges and shifting geopolitical dynamics. Our correspondent Katie Wilson has more.
Well, another jam-packed opening ceremony of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. As you can see, standing room only for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's speech. He's just wrapping up behind me now, and I want to bring you some key lines straight away from Erdogan's speech. As the host of this forum said, it would be stating the obvious to say that this forum is taking place in an uncertain and fragmented world. Now, Erdogan did talk about the crisis in the Middle East and called for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. He said the Gulf countries' right of access to international waters must not be restricted. But he also said that Turkey is open to cooperation with its neighbours through projects such as the Development Road. So he's really establishing Turkey there as a mediator and as a key player in the diplomatic sphere. And that also applied to the Russia-Ukraine war. He said that Turkey stands ready to support facilitation efforts, including a leaders' summit, so touching on many global issues there. And I think that's the key thing about ADF and what makes it unique, and that this is a platform for dialogue and conversation, not necessarily a platform where things get signed or things get decided. And we've been seeing that throughout the day. On only the first day of the forum, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev met with the Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, among many other things, and there are still conversations to be had later this afternoon between representatives from Azerbaijan and Armenia. So many discussions happening here today, which, as I said, comes at a time when conversation is needed. And as this wraps up, I will bring you more developments from the rest of the forum, as I'm sure there is plenty more to come. This is Katie Wilson and Elbruz Musayev from Antalya in Turkey.
Continuing with the diplomacy forum, as discussions continue, the focus remains on turning dialogue into action, seeking pathways toward a more stable, inclusive and resilient world. Here's more.
The Mediterranean city of Antalya is hosting representatives from more than 150 countries as global leaders gather for the 5th edition of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. The 3-day forum brings together heads of state, ministers, diplomats and experts at a time of growing global uncertainty. More than 20 leaders, dozens of foreign ministers and representatives from international organizations are taking part, alongside academics, business figures and civil society. Organized by Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and supported by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the forum aims to address some of the world's most pressing challenges through dialogue and cooperation.
5 years ago, we set out with the goal of creating a global platform that would take the pulse of diplomacy. Today, we see that the Antalya Diplomacy Forum has become a shared platform for global wisdom, the world's conscience, and above all, hope for the future. I believe that the discussions to be held over the next 3 days will further highlight the forum's unique and distinctive character.
In his opening speech, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan highlighted that while last year's discussions centered on the war in Gaza, attention is now turning to rising tensions involving Iran. He stressed that the immediate priority must be achieving a ceasefire, while warning that current conflicts could have far-reaching historical consequences. This year's theme, Mapping Tomorrow, Managing Uncertainties, reflects the need to better anticipate global risks and respond to rapid change. More than 40 panels and high-level sessions are scheduled, covering key issues such as the Russia-Ukraine war, ongoing tensions in the Middle East, and the crisis in Sudan. Organisers say the forum provides an important platform to rebuild trust and encourage dialogue at a time when international coordination is increasingly strained. Through panel discussions, bilateral meetings, and informal exchanges, leaders are working to identify practical solutions and share strategies.
Azerbaijan says its foreign policy agenda is now fully focused on peace, regional cooperation and integration amid ongoing global instability. That was the message from Hikmet Hacıyev, assistant to the president of Azerbaijan, in an interview with A News on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum in Turkey.
ADF forum with an agenda of the peace, and before we were talking about an elements of the conflict. Unfortunately, they were persisting. But today, Azerbaijan's agenda is completely about peace, and it's also regional ownership and regional responsibility and regional integration and cooperation that Azerbaijan tries to deliver and to shape our region in a peaceful manner. And in that sense, Azerbaijan is not just waiting for external solutions towards regional challenges and problems. We have a full regional knowledge and awareness, and we are very adamant of the realities of our region, and based on such principles and parameters, and we have shaped and in a sense Azerbaijan acted like an architect of the new status quo in the region. That's also based on the norms and principles of international law, international legitimacy. That is all in all that Azerbaijan tries to present at the time of the global turmoil and also crisis of the multilateralism. Regional ownership matters a lot.
Azerbaijan and Armenia have made new contact on the margins of an international parliamentary forum in Turkey. Azerbaijan's parliamentary speaker Sahiba Gafarova has held talks with her Armenian counterpart Alain Simonyan. The talks took place on the sidelines of the 152nd Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, which is being held in Istanbul from 15th to 19th of April. This year's assembly is focused on hope, peace and justice for future generations.
Active engagement of member parliamentarians in the work of the network.
Syria says it's positioning itself as a key transit hub for regional energy flows, offering new routes linking the Persian Gulf to Turkey and beyond. Here are the details.
Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara said Syria is offering what he described as a safe corridor and alternative route for energy shipments across the region. Speaking to local state media during a visit to Turkey, al-Shara said connectivity was being enhanced between the Arab Gulf states and Turkey via Syria and Jordan. He made the remarks after arriving in Turkey to attend the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, which kicked off Friday and will continue through the weekend. al-Shara noted that Iraqi oil is now being shipped through Syrian ports under a joint agreement between Damascus and Baghdad. He said the agreement reflected growing regional cooperation in the energy sector. In this regard, the Syrian leader highlighted the so-called 4 Cs project, a long-discussed initiative aimed at transforming the region into a major energy and transport hub.
What the world is seeking most urgently right now is security for supply chains and energy. This integration, linking Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, Syria and Turkey on the Mediterranean, and the Gulf's access to both the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf, fits that need precisely.
Plans include the development of pipelines, railways, and road corridors designed to facilitate the movement of energy resources and goods across multiple regions. Advocates of the project say the initiative could significantly reduce reliance on traditional maritime choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz. al-Shara stressed that such initiatives would serve to enhance regional connectivity and economic integration. His remarks come as regional countries explore alternative routes to ensure the uninterrupted flow of energy supplies at a time of increased geopolitical tensions. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Wind power saw the sharpest growth in Azerbaijan's energy production in the first quarter of this year. Generation reached 247.7 million kilowatt hours, up 26 times from last year. This is according to operational data on electricity indicators for the first quarter of this year, released by the Ministry of Energy. Overall electricity production also increased, rising by 10.6% year-on-year. Meanwhile, electricity generation at the solid waste incineration plant went up by 22% compared to the same period last year. A quiet but politically charged diplomatic visit to Tbilisi is drawing attention across Europe as senior envoys from 3 key EU states arrive at a moment when Georgia's relationship with Brussels hangs in the balance. Our correspondent brings us more from Tbilisi.
A delegation from the Weimar Triangle countries, France, Germany and Poland held a series of high-level meetings in Tbilisi on April 16th, engaging with government officials, opposition leaders and civil society representatives in what appears to be a coordinated effort to assess Georgia's political trajectory and its strained ties with the European Union. The visit comes just days before EU foreign ministers are set to convene in Luxembourg, where Georgia is expected to be part of the discussion, a timing what adds weight to the delegation's fact-finding mission. On the government side, Foreign Minister Makab Bacharishvili emphasized regional security challenges and reiterated Georgia's priorities in maintaining stability, while European representatives reaffirmed their support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Officials described the talks as constructive, with Parliamentary Committee Chair Levan Mahashvili stressing that, despite differences, both sides see the dialogue as essential. At the same time, subtle tensions surfaced. Georgian officials raised concerns over what they described as inconsistencies in European messaging, including a prolonged technical error on Germany's foreign minister website referencing former President Salome Zurabishvili. Opposition figures and civil society groups painted a more critical picture. They highlighted democratic backsliding, controversial legislation, and what they see as a growing disconnect from European standards. For them, restoring relations with the EU depends on internal political normalization. Across all meetings, a common thread emerged. Communication has not broken down entirely, but trust has weakened. The delegation's decision not to comment publicly leaves room for interpretation, but with Luxembourg approaching, their findings may soon translate into clearer signals from Brussels on where Georgia stands and where it is heading. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
A court hearing in Yerevan has sparked tensions outside the building, with police moving against supporters of businessman Samvel Karapetyan. Supporters of Samvel Karapetyan gathered outside Armenia's anti-corruption court as judges heard his case on Friday. Police intervened after scuffles broke out near the building, and authorities said 17 people were detained. Officers pushed people back from the court entrance, while local media reported that objects were thrown during the confrontation. China and Turkmenistan have agreed on a new phase of development at one of Central Asia's largest gas fields, alongside plans to expand processing capacity and pipeline infrastructure. The deal comes as China remains heavily reliant on Turkmen gas supplies and looks to secure long-term volumes. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimruzana has the full details.
China's state-owned energy giant CNPC and Turkmenistan's state company Turkmengas have signed an agreement to launch their fourth phase of development at the Galkonush gas field, alongside construction of a gas processing plant with an annual capacity of 10 billion cubic meters. Turkmengas chairman Maksat Babayev said the project will be financed from Turkmenistan's own resources. According to Reuters, the total cost is estimated at $5.1 billion. The deal comes as China continues to rely heavily on Turkmen gas delivered through the Turkmenistan-China pipeline system, which has been operating for more than 16 years. The network currently transports over 30 billion cubic meters annually through 3 lines, with a 4th line planned that would increase capacity to around 65 billion cubic meters per year. At the center of this cooperation is the Galkonush gas field, which also carries broader strategic significance. Beyond existing exports to China, it's seen as a potential supply base for future routes toward South Asia and possibly Europe via the Caspian Sea. And according to Britain's Geffnik Line, reserves at Galkonush and nearby structures are estimated at 27.4 trillion cubic meters, underlining the field's global scale and importance. Fariza Kalimruzana, Almaty, A-News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the Antalya Diplomacy Forum 2026 and its focus on global risks and energy security. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum 2026 is underway in Antalya, bringing together global leaders under the theme Mapping Tomorrow, Managing Uncertainties, hosted under the auspices of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The forum is focusing on geopolitical risks, energy security and regional stability, from the South Caucasus to global markets. To unpack the key takeaways, I'm joined by John Kavulik, senior editor at Issue Insight, who joins us from London. Mr. Kavulik, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Kavulik, how significant has the Antalya Diplomacy Forum become in shaping global diplomatic dialogue since its launch in 2021?
You're using the proper word, dialogue. And the one continuum that President Erdogan has focused since the first forum, and that is increasing every year the number of heads of state and heads of government who attend, and the variety from where they come geographically as well as politically. And he's continued to be able to do that. And this year is the most impressive of all, in large measure because of what is happening in the Gulf, what is happening with respect to the Israel-US-Iran war, and then how these countries are trying to manage what is happening there, then the unknown, which is Donald Trump, President Trump, from day to day, what his decision-making is going to be. And then they're trying to create, in essence, a parallel universe of diplomacy and of commerce and of finance, which is what you mentioned in terms of focusing on the Caucasus, focusing on Syria, and focusing on these somewhat micro relationships that don't necessarily attract the attention of the macro guys, meaning US, Russia, etc.
Mr. Kavulik, how do you assess the discussions around energy security at the forum, especially amid ongoing geopolitical tensions?
The challenge is going to be that the discussions are important. The ideas are not only important ideas, but they're doable. A lot of times you will see at events where heads of state and heads of government will just start talking about their inspirations and their aspirations, and some of it is just not practical. What we have here is a continuation of heads of state and heads of government that are moving toward trying to be realistic, and primarily their realism depends on funding. And so a lot of what President al-Shara said, with Syria, as far as using that as a transit point. Yes. Turkey is already. Azerbaijan is doing its part. Georgia is looking at what it can do. And so a lot of this is doable, but it takes money. And every dollar that goes into these projects is going to be a dollar that doesn't go into something else. So the key for all of these discussions is going to be to where they can lead practically to actually be implementable.
Mr. Kavulik, turning to the South Caucasus, how do you interpret Hikmat Hajiyev's statement that the region is entering a more stable phase? Do you see genuine momentum toward lasting peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
What's happened with Azerbaijan and Armenia the last 5 years has truly been extraordinary. And in large measure, it predated obviously the second Trump administration, but President Trump has been focused on it. But this has really been about a head of state in Azerbaijan, a head of government in Armenia, making some very difficult decisions, making difficult political, economic, financial, societal, military decisions. And so it's become the example that everyone's using. And then you insert President Trump with his role in terms of sort of pushing the final necessities so that we could have a cessation of the military conflict, and that word peace begin to develop. And the U.S. role is critical to that. But it's been the commitment from the head of state and head of government that's made it work. And then you turn toward, Georgia, which, the Prime Minister of Georgia is in Antalya, and you have EU representatives in Georgia. I mean, there's a real effort to try to claw Georgia out of where it is and move it toward where it used to be, and where, in large measure, the government of the Russian Federation, vis-a-vis its control of Abkhazia and Ossetia, really don't want it to go. So there is a lot going on, and they're all important areas. But the key, as you set up, Azerbaijan and Armenia needed to come first before the others could follow. And that's what's happening. And recently we had Turkish Airlines that had flights into Armenia, but from the Asian side, started the flights in from Istanbul. Again, sort of normalization. President Erdogan is clearly, in the Azerbaijan camp, but he recognizes that there's a lot of opportunity for Turkiye companies with Armenia because of sharing the border. So everyone is looking for their opportunities, but Armenia and Azerbaijan have been pretty much the key to unlocking all this other potential.
In your view, how do forums like Antalya Diplomacy Forum compare to platforms such as the Munich Security Conference in terms of influence?
Well, the Munich Security Conference has the cachet. It's in Munich, so it's in an EU country, and a lot of politicians want to go to Munich. We have a huge U.S. congressional delegation that goes every year from the House and from the Senate, because it's what we call a CODEL, congressional delegation, and they like to go there. They like the meetings, they like to be seen, they like to talk to the media, they like to stay in nice hotels, they like to spend taxpayer money. And so Munich has that. But, there are, interesting speeches, heads of state and heads of government. But what happens in Antalya is different because, and this is, I'm not being disrespectful of all, but this is more of an opportunity for worker bees to do work, as opposed to sitting on a stage making some statements, because this is a multi-day, it's out of a big city, so they're somewhat cocooned down there. And it is among the majority, you've got representative of the Stans, the former republics of the USSR, you've got the Caucasus, you've got the Gulf states in the Middle East. So you've got, and then of course Pakistan is there, and they've been very, very much in the news in terms of their negotiating prowess. And so you're bringing all of these first, second, third tier worker bees together where they can actually make some things happen, as opposed to just standing up there and giving some great speeches. And President Erdogan, he's sort of the king of what I call the sweets and tea diplomacy, where he just gets people together and sits down, and he's always made the case that you can't get much done with people you don't like if you don't sit and talk to them. And what Antalya does is bring some people together who don't necessarily, you'll find that they're going to seek each other out, but this gives them an opportunity to seek each other out in a more quiet way and get some things done. So, the government of Turkey is really good at this stuff. And as we've seen the progression in Antalya over the last 5 years, it continues to get larger and larger, not only in terms of the participants, meaning the heads of state, heads of government, foreign ministers, the like, but also the analysts that go, the NGOs that go, and then lastly, the media coverage. The media coverage of this event has exploded during the last couple of years. Yes. And that's critical too, so these people can get their messages out.
Jan Kavulik, thank you very much for talking to A News. It was great to have you with us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.